Ladies and gentlemen, we can take our seats, please. Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel, one-on-one discussion, is with His Excellency Dr. Hisham Zazou, the Egyptian Minister of Tourism. And as we know, in the context of public diplomacy, what we need to talk about today is how we relate public diplomacy to tourism. There's a major difference here where we do tourism promotions, tourism advertising, exhibitions that we travel to. All of these things are, in a sense, country promotional strategies. But on the other hand, there's the public diplomacy aspect of promoting tourism. And that goes into the cultural exchange of things. I mean, taking, like we do with Tutankhamun when we travel with him to New York or things to that extent, that falls into the concept of public diplomacy, people to people touching each other. Now, the interesting thing that I've noticed about most of the campaigns for the Ministry of Tourism when addressing the public consumers around the world through international advertising campaigns, what I've noticed were two things, or two components. One is a segment for the Arabs, where the advertisements are directed towards the Gulf, CCC, the Arabs, and the rest, the next ad, is for everyone else. It does not take into consideration maybe the breakdown in segmentation between African tourists, Latin American tourists, American tourists broken down by state. The point of segmentation, that is extremely important in what we want to achieve. How do you segment the world as the Ministry of Tourism? How do you segment the world? I'm also the Secretary General of the Asia-Egypt Business Association. My chairman, Karim Bilal, is here, and we just had a fantastic conversation with His Excellency Ahmed Ismail, who is head of the Asian Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we were talking about capturing just 1%. Just 1% of, for example, the 700 million people in ASEAN, or the 4.4 billion consumers that are in Asia. And one of the things that we kept on getting is the preferences, that we're not accommodating for the preferences of these people. We don't understand them. We haven't segmented them. We haven't broken them down into geographic and demographic segmentations. How do you view that? And what's going to be different this time around from the Ministry of Tourism that we've seen pre-2011?
First, let me tell you, I feel I am sitting behind the woods as if I'm hiding with all these microphones. Can I stand up? Because I feel I'll be more relaxed. I can't see anybody. First, good morning to everybody, and thank you for the invitation today. And let me start by giving just a quick feel. I had a very, very brief talk with my very dear friend, General Samah Sekil this morning, and I asked him, I said, is public diplomacy an Egyptian invention? Because we're becoming very creative in many things these days after the revolution. So is it an Egyptian invention? I didn't make my research. They told me no. It's an international invention. The Chinese were the first to invent it many, many years ago, late 60s, with the ping pong matches with the US, softening the relationship between the US-China relations at the time that culminated with the Nixon visit to the early 70s. Let me tell you that I believe that the Egyptian public diplomacy will improvise and recreate, in my opinion. We're quite creative in that sense. So I'm very happy with that initiative. And I believe this initiative can help tourism. It did help tourism. I think the delegation, His Excellency Minister Orabi did head a delegation to Russia at the time when we had this negative travel advisory from Russia. And Russia was and still is, a very important source market for Egypt. It gave us in 2010 2.8 million, and not a very good year, which was last year, 2012, it gave us 2.5 million tourists. So it's a very important source destinations. I think from the feedback that I got after this visit was very favorable. So let me put it this way, the feeling that I have, and I'll make more research, I promise, next time we meet, I believe the public diplomacy can help a lot, the official diplomacy, the official work of the government, and even the private sector in that sense. It does complement. And I believe the fact that this movement is going on is gaining momentum worldwide, and as far as the travel sector is concerned, is definitely helping. Let me tell you regarding your question, which can take much more than my session, the world has changed. What you have been referring to is something that we have been doing in the past, is segmenting the source market into two main components. The West, including Europe, the US is included, and the Arab Middle East area, and directing our promotional activities to these two specific components. The world changed. That was suitable some years back, maybe until five years back even, not very long ago. I believe things have changed, the dynamics has changed because of the introduction of technology. The Facebook, the social media, the internet has changed the dynamics. We have 2 billion users today for internet, and these 2 billion, 30% of are using it for tourism purposes, either browsing or conducting a full transaction over the internet. Now, you're speaking about the world, and you need to resegment it again. So, actually, I remember, or I'm recalling the book of Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat. The world is definitely flattened in that sense. And when it comes to tourism, it had flattened, but it has been also fragmented at the same time. I mean, there is a direct correlation between this flattening of the world in that sense and the fragmentation at the same time. So flattening in sense of communication and availability of info and availability of the needed material for decision making. However, this gives sort of speciality in the addressing. I mean, what is happening with cable TV is happening now with tourism. I mean, there is personal preferences for the consumer of today. So what I'm sending for Europe is definitely on the other spectrum of what I should be sending to China, for instance. And that's why if you look at what had happened with the tourism in Egypt after the revolution of the 25th, when I took over, they told me, let's start quickly and make our international campaign. I said yes and no. Yes for the international campaign, and no for the old way of doing it. Because we need to put more money into the direct access to these special markets. So now I'm putting much more money in internet activity, mobile applications, and all this will come out in the coming few weeks. I'm not very much concerned with the old international campaigns that used to come out on CNN and BBC. This is too generic, and it dilutes the message of the Egyptian tourism. You should be more focused and address it in a different way. So addressing the consumer, as you mentioned, that is the message that is suitable for Europe definitely is not suitable for China or Japan or Korea. And even within the ASEAN countries, what is suitable for Japan is definitely not suitable for Korea, for instance. You need to address all this in the messaging, and this is what we're trying to prepare at the moment. Now, regarding the handling of the tourist himself, we need also to move into addressing the needs on an individualistic basis. The culture issues are very relevant to our messaging today. So all these factors should be taken into consideration while attending. Of course, while I'm trying to prove the point of fragmentation, I still have to admit that because of the flattening of the world, there is an international culture now in that sense, but at the same time there is speciality for the different cultures. But the flattening of the world that had happened in the past 10 years is definitely having a general approach to the world. The world is now much more interconnected in that sense, and accordingly there is a general message that applies to everybody, but specific to applies to each category. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that. I'll stand to ask you a question. Now, when we're talking about public diplomacy, and like His Excellency Mohammed Rabi said this morning, it's a people-to-people thing. When we do have tourists here in Egypt, it is the responsibility of the Ministry of Tourism to train and educate from the bottom up. I mean, from the person that is standing under the pyramids. I mean, they have to be trained in public diplomacy because in the reality, they deal with the foreigners, they deal with tourists, so they are one of the major faces of public diplomacy in Egypt. Now we know, and we cannot deny this even as an Egyptian that visits these sites, we don't find, you know, the proper training, the proper understanding of the people at the tourist locations that can really be part of a public diplomacy front. So what are the efforts of the Ministry of Tourism in creating awareness, maybe not in the context of public diplomacy per se, but for them to be able to deal with the tourists, which can eventually calculate or amount to repeat visits. So what is the efforts on doing from the bottom up and not abroad? We're talking about here in Egypt.
Yet another, my friend, yet another very important issue. I have to agree that tourism awareness in that sense and training for the different sectors. Now we had a very unfortunate experience a few years back between 2008 and 2009. We tried to make a public awareness campaign and it went out on TV, if you remember, the ministry. And it didn't work very well. Why? Because it's very diluted. You're speaking to everybody through this public media. And we cannot change cultural and habits and ways of handling by the Egyptians for the foreigners by just a campaign of awareness over the TV, etc. I think we should be more concentrated and focused and be more practical and pragmatic. And I am one of these very practical and pragmatic people. I mean, we should concentrate on and focus on the circles first that deals with the tourist. I'm speaking about the officer at the airport, the taxi driver, the Kalesh driver in Luxor or here in the Pyramids area. So we need to focus on sending and training and creating the necessary awareness for these who are in direct contact with the tourist. But speaking about the general public, it will take much more effort in that sense. Let me tell you that tourism is the final product of the society. If the society values certain values in that sense, it can help positively the tourism flow. But it is not the sole responsibility of the Ministry of Tourism. It is the responsibility of many organizations within the official, but yet again, and that's public diplomacy and NGOs and related circles can help in creating much more understanding. Let me tell you that we have won on one part and lost on the other. I have to admit, 30 years ago, and I've been working in that business for more than 30 years so far, when we used to have, and I'm sure all of the attendees this morning can recall or have similar experiences. In the past, a tourist used to come to Egypt, let's say to Cairo, and goes around, footing around and seeing on his own some of the sites within Cairo, and he loses his way. He doesn't know the language. So he stops an Egyptian and asks him, how can I go to this place? And that Egyptian used to take him by hand to that specific address. And that left a very positive impact on him. Today, and after the revolution, that negative part, I have to be honest, we say the opposite. If somebody stops you at downtown, please don't listen to him and leave, because you are afraid of a negative experience for this tourist. So there is, unfortunately, some negative paradigm shift happened in our Egyptian society, and we need to be honest to address all these issues if we would like to have an inclusive approach to tourism by the society.
Your Excellency, again, as we were discussing earlier, now, a lot of people make a lot of money out of the content. Just the content in the past 3 years that came out of Egypt. reporters, journalists, television channels, none of them are Egyptian. The same is very true when it comes to tourism as well. And I had suggested a channel that talks to the world in a language that they understand. And the same question would fall for tourism in Egypt. I mean, with all the wealth of tourism that we have, as any financial person that would think about it, it makes viable sense for us to have an Egyptian tourism channel, which would give you accessibility to the world in languages they can understand, with documentaries, with messages, instead of having to rely on, again, foreign media to create content for us, about us, and sell it to us. What's your take on a television channel in international language that strictly talks about tourism in Egypt? I heard a fantastic initiative the other day that you have undertaken, very late, but it was done, very simple, very small, and that is to put internet streaming cameras in touristic areas in Egypt. I've been watching them 10 years, you know, going onto beaches in Los Angeles or things to that extent. Now you've started to do it because you want to address it. So why not take it a step further? What's your take on creating a channel in an international language for tourism across the world for Egypt?
Thank you for the observation, and I'll start by shocking you. I disagree. I beg to differ. I'll tell you why. First of all, let me differentiate between the screens that I have put on 5 locations so far, and I'll make it 25. These are live streaming images from our resorts and other sites to the world over the internet. And I used that, and I thought it creatively, to use this tool to convince people when I tell them that it is okay in Egypt, you can come and enjoy your time, there is no problem. What you see in media does not reflect on the whole of Egypt. Geographically, this is happening only in Cairo, and maybe sometimes only one day a week, which is a Friday right after prayers for a few hours. So, and that was one, by the way, of the reasons I had a chance to complement the efforts of Nabil Fahmi's effort to lift or soften the negative travel advisory. I met a lot of ministers of foreign affairs recently, and I told them this is unfair to have a general negative travel geographically for Egypt. You should be much more concentrated on the areas that has problems. And they did agree. Now, that's the difference. But if creating a TV channel, the experience of the world says you create TV channels, tourism channels in the source markets of export tourism and not for import tourism. You have a TV channel in a place like Europe where affluence, people can afford disposable money for traveling, and you have a public that wants to have information, so he goes for TV and internet and other vehicles. If you put on the receiving end, you dilute the message. We are better off putting the money in creating the content that you mentioned and the info that you mentioned and putting it in famous TV channels abroad, rather than creating our own TV channel and trying to put it in different language to address everybody. So I'd rather go to China for a famous TV channel there and create content and make a deal and send the message through that local TV channel, speaking about fragmentation and flattening at the same time, and go to Europe to the major TV channels and do it. If we create our own TV channels, we'll put a lot of money not in the right place.
Extremely valid point, Your Excellency. Extremely valid point, and I agree with you on that part, but I also agree that it's going to take a lot of effort. I mean, we're going to have a communication panel of private sector multinationals later on, and they are very used to this cross-global, you know, marketing and advertising like the big names. So that is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of money, the media planning, the media buying, the media segmentation on the channel in China. So, you know,
use the platform, do not reinvent the wheel. Use the existing platforms. The best in internet, use it. I have a campaign with Google. That's a good platform. I can reach better. With social media, concentrate on creative content rather than the organization of having a TV channel by itself. I disagree in wasting the money on that. I know exactly where should we go. That's my problem. I know exactly how to navigate these very special times in that sense. This will be money wasted, my friend. I believe in that.
One of the important things that we're looking at this point, that not only tourism but alternative tourism as well, something like business tourism. Do we have business tourism in Egypt? I mean, it's very, very important at this point because a lot of the private sector is involved, and they also do their public diplomacy delegations. Because let me tell you, whenever you are trying to convince someone to buy shares in a company or to invest in a company, you have to tell the story of the country that the company is in, and hence we are always pitching Egypt on the public diplomacy front. How do you support the business sector, hotels like this, not on just the weddings and the room nights, but also on the business concept, conventions, business large conferences? What are we doing to try and attract these people by going and large organizations come and do their conferences in Egypt? What's your take?
Very good question. Let me tell you that a tourist, in terms of defining a tourist, includes that business traveler that's coming. Because a tourist, per the UNWTO, the United Nations World Tourism Organization, is this person who leaves his own regular environment for another place for a period no less than 24 hours and no more than 365 days a year, not for the purpose of work. In that sense, that's the tourist. So it applies for the business. Who comes to the country less than 24 hours is considered, per definition internationally, as a visitor. So you have a visitor and a tourist. So the day visitor is something different than the tourist in that sense. Now the business segment falls under the tourist, and we need to attract it. The problem in Egypt is that I could attract that sector, but unfortunately we don't have under our jurisdiction, under our power in that sense, some of the tools that can help. It is under other ministries in that sense. For instance, we need to have under the Ministry of Tourism, I think on the longer run, the convention center and related activity of exhibitions. This way you can create a specific agenda year round, mingle or mix the tourism activities that we have a good know-how in with this business activity. That creates a backdrop that helps to say, well, yes, I'll go to Egypt, I'll go to Cairo, to Sharm, attend this conference on the food business or the agri-business or whatever you name it in that sense. We don't have an organization powerful, understands the dynamics in that sense within the Egyptian government at the moment. You need to change that. And you need to complement the efforts if we still keep it not under the Ministry of Tourism. We used to have, if you remember, under the Ministry of Tourism, the CICC. It's now under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And I don't think any of us made big strides in that sense to create the right platform to attract more business community to come to Egypt. Even working with the Ministry of Investment is very important in that respect. That's why South Africa, right after Mandela, created a very good film on South Africa, and it was not a tourism film. It was not a tourism attracting film. It was speaking about South Africa as a tourism destination, as a business destination, an investment destination in that sense, and speaking about the people. Now, to do that, you need to create a forum where you have everybody under one roof at least to go for that vision. That vision is non-existent at this stage. Now, if you ask me, you want to go for it? I tell you again, my friend, I have a problem, I have priorities. We have a problem with the tourist sector. I am concentrating more to create back the demand. The problem is to lose the demand. Once we create the demand and get the momentum back, and that's a very resilient industry. Let me give you 3 figures. The worst September we had was last September, September 2013, right after the issuing of the travel embargo, the negative travel advisories on Egypt. We lost more than 90%. We received only 300,000 guests in September. Either they extended their stay from August to September, or very few came. Maybe some of these numbers include the reporters you're mentioning about coming to report on what's happening. And they're tourists in that sense, per definition. So 300,000. Right after we worked hard to start lifting those negative travel advisories, the figure jumped to 562 in October, yet again 673 in November. Okay, these are below still the average figures of the same month last year, which was around 1 million. So 40% less than the normal figure of not a very good year of 2012. The 2010 was 0.2, 1.3 million per month average. So we're speaking about still a way to go. But the trend shows very clearly, once you have some stability, some positive signs coming out of Egypt, the tourism rebounds back very fast, very fast. And that's a proof the last 3 months in that sense. So I'm concentrating more than fragmenting my efforts on one thing, creating the demand back again to the country. I have high hopes on next February 2014 to go back to almost normal, which is around 1 million passengers a month.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I have just 2 questions very, very quickly. Now, since we are talking in the context of public diplomacy, might not fall under the Ministry of Tourism specifically, but why don't we have the strong relationship with Hollywood that we should have? I mean, this has always been an issue that we have not had these people come and film in Egypt. We're not giving them accessibility. And I believe that that is one of the strongest public diplomacy tools that we can utilize. How is that going to change under your management?
I'm fighting to change this. We need to have Hollywood and Bollywood coming to Egypt. I'm already speaking to the various ministries to ease off all these bureaucratic hurdles and restrictions that preventing the film industry from coming to Egypt. It is a pity to have an Oscar-winning film like The English Patient, which had its, historically it was supposed to be in Egypt, the events of that film in the Western desert, and it was filmed, I think, in Morocco, which is a shame to have. Morocco today invites people to go to a specific area where they have the studios, the outdoor studios, and they have the pyramids and a sphinx and everything. We have the real thing. Why don't we capitalize on that, and we can make lots of money? And on a local basis, the Turkish drama proved that, and it increased tourism from the Middle East, from the CC countries by 25% in 1 year alone. So I certainly add my voice to yours in that sense, that we need to. And I think if we did 2 revolutions, the third should be routine, trying to combat routine and bureaucracy, and working on harmoniously between the various government bodies. And the Egyptians should start their real revolution by production and working hard to build our country back. And I'm saying that because that's an example. Nobody is touching the issue of trying to attract the film industry, and we're working as different departments alone, the antiquities, the culture, us, even the Ministry of Finance, because of the customs and the hurdles in that respect.
Your Excellency, my final comments and what we're trying to get as a conclusion from all our speakers today is your suggestions and recommendations for us collectively to create a national strategy for public diplomacy. What are your recommendations for us in this conference to create this national strategy?
I think you started this movement. It should be sort of a foundation, I would say. We need to make it on an ongoing issue, and that needs to have an establishment for the public diplomacy. You need to have experts from the various disciplines in Egypt trying to help and push in whatever direction you need. So sometimes I would come as a person in charge of tourism to this body, this foundation, and ask a help for tourism. So you need to have tourism experts within the group or this foundation. If we're speaking about investment, to have experts in that sense, and then work in harmony with the government to see the direction that we need to go to, and put these as not only initiatives but objectives to achieve. Have a calendar agenda of activity in that sense, working in a way with the targets of the government and the society in that sense. I believe this could have a much more effective approach for the results.
Excellency, we can count on the support of the Ministry of Tourism on our efforts. Absolutely. Your Excellency, thank you so much for this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your attention. I hope I was not too boring.